Well, thanks for doing the show, John. It's an honor to have you. I really appreciate it. And before each of these, I always make a point to dive as deep as I can into the works of the musicians I'm talking to. And it's been really inspiring to go, back over your catalog and to listen to as much of your music as I can. But you've given me a real challenge because you've got a really astounding body of work. I mean, you've really put out a ton of music. It's hard to imagine you're getting a lot of sleep. And I'm wondering if you can give me a little insight into, one, where you look for inspiration for new music. And then once you have an idea, how you go about what your methodology is in trying to take that idea and turn it into, an arrangement for a large ensemble or for the Claudia Quintet or for any of your other groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'm always looking for inspiration. So it became apparent many years ago that I could really use anything for inspiration. Like, it could be music, it could be non-music, it could be numbers, images, it could be an experience of some kind. Anything that was like somehow meaningful, or I wanted to share with others. So it could be a book, that's usually not all the time. Sometimes it starts just with music, but a lot of times it starts with something that doesn't have anything to do with music. And then the fun is translating that to music, so this kind of process of like, now what do I do with this? I've got this thing, and then I somehow want it to be related to the music. Although sometimes it doesn't matter also. It can just be what I would call a cell, and through that cell, then I make a piece. And then nobody has to even know that it started with this, certain little thing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's cool if people know. Sometimes it might bring some kind of extra meaning to the listening experience. But other times it's just a way for me to start in a different place than I would, like if I just kind of started in where my habits would take me. Mm-hmm. So as long as I kind of start somewhere else, and then, create like a whole process based on that where I started. It's not a guarantee, but I think the goal would be that I don't repeat myself. Mm-hmm. And also that I don't repeat, what others have done, and that I, kind of create something that's somehow like its own thing. It's unique. It doesn't have to be like revolutionary, but it's like, at least I have not heard that yet.
Sure.
So it's like, that's where I want to be, like in the I haven't heard that yet area.
Yeah.
Of course, through ignorance, it's possible that, I just haven't heard something and it's been done already. But, I try to check out a lot of music, and I like lots of different kinds of music. So, it hasn't happened too many times that, I think I have this like incredible, unique thing, and then I realize, somebody, already did that.
Sure.
It's happened a few times, but yeah, for the most part. So let's see, that was only the first part of your question, I think.
Yeah. Although I'll add, I think that's really a feature of your music, is that you're able to have these very different realms. Like, I feel like each piece is unique, and yet it all speaks to your own individual approach. I mean, it's very definitively you, but everything that you do is slightly different. And I imagine that from what you're talking about, that having the inspiration come from so many different places really gives you the opportunity to try out different things and avoid falling into your own, let's say, cliches or your own habits.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody has those.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's easy to, in the moment when you're writing, you're kind of vulnerable and you're looking for something. So if there's something like within reach, you reach for it,
Yeah.
One of the maybe disadvantage that I maybe turned into an advantage is being a drummer. I didn't have a lot of harmonic, let's say, progressions at my fingertips, like a guitarist or a pianist might have.
Mm-hmm.
And so also as a non pitch player, I didn't have like a lot of licks or even scales, or I didn't really have that. It's there, I know it, but it's not like right there.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in a way that was, it made it harder at first, because I'm like, where do I go? I can't do this. Where am I? But then down the line I realized, it's kind of an advantage. And when I started hearing my friends write music and I was writing music, and their music was really good, I'm speaking really generally, but a lot of it kind of sounded like music I had heard before, and it was almost like music that's about music or music that's based on music. And I was like, yeah, that's really good. I mean, like, technique could be good and craft, and it could be a nice tune, but then a lot of times there was something that I thought, but it's kind of, I've heard that before,
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a thing for me that I had since when I was very little, that sometimes is a drag, but it's that I never wanted to hear the same thing again, So even when I first started listening to music, it seemed like all the beats were the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I know it's more nuanced than that. They're not all the same. And even some of them that are technically the same have a different feel, a different sound. Now I understand that more. But there was years where I was just like, everything's like a backbeat on 2 and 4. Like, what's going on? Like, it's all the same stuff, And I didn't deal with like lots of music, because it just, in a kind of surface way, sounded like other music.
Okay.
Yeah. I've gotten over that a lot, but even chord progressions, when there was a lot of pop music, and I was like, wait a minute, that's not a new tune. I've heard that progression before, and then
Sure.
Immediately I'd just be like, all right, I'm not gonna listen to that,
Sure.
So that's something I just had since I was young, but I've gotten better at that.
Sure. So when you're a young kid, you're looking for all kinds of different styles of music because you're getting bored of just listening to the, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I got into jazz, because when I heard jazz, I was just like, what is that?
Sure, yeah.
I don't know what's going on. And then, I'd hear it again, and like, I still don't really know what's going on. I kind of heard a few things the second time that I didn't hear the first time, And then, I'd hear the same tune, but with a different band, and it was like, oh my God, it's totally different. And, and then of course live. So there's, the improvisation aspect.
Sure.
But then, of course, like 15 years later, I was just like, every jazz tune has the same form, and I was like, I don't, so then that was dismissed.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
For the same kind of reasons. But at first I was just like, the mystery of it. It's a mystery,
Sure.
That really, I like mysterious things. I like when I don't know what it is. Like when I'm listening to something and I'm like, I don't really know what that is. I don't know what instrument it is, or I don't know what is that, And I don't try to be like too theoretical and figure it out at that moment. Like, I've been to concerts like Steve Coleman concerts where everyone's like getting out their fingers and okay, this is in 7, and trying to figure out.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So I don't usually do that, but I just like to be in that state of like, I don't know what this is, and,
Sure.
That's kind of maybe the driving force behind the music that I'm writing, is I kind of want people to also be like, I don't know, not sure. like, it could be, I don't know what style this is, or I don't know how this was put together, or like with the Claudia Quintet, I think what we get into a lot is like, I don't know what instrument that is. That sounds like what is that? Is that a reed instrument? Is it, oh, it's clarinet and accordion, so it sounds like two clarinets, or it sounds like, like,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
What is that? When you put those instruments together, you get like a hyper instrument, what is that? So
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing behind it, is I like the not knowing what
Sure.
it is.
Do you try to surprise yourself? Do you try to go into writing music and try to come up with something? I mean, just to come up with something you wouldn't have certainly that you've never heard, but as you're going about trying to create a new piece of music, are there ways that you try to see it from the listener's, let's say, standpoint and try to like freak yourself out a little bit?
I think once I get into it, the piece is about the piece. So I'm not putting any extraneous challenges on it, let's say.
Sure.
It's like I might have had those going in, but once I get into a piece, I make the piece about the piece.
Okay.
And so I let the piece tell me what it wants to be. And so sometimes a piece doesn't want to be a surprise, or doesn't want to surprise me,
Mm-hmm.
It wants to be just this thing, So yeah, I'm not sure if I think of it like that. I don't think it's not as much about like surprising, because something that I've thought about a lot with some different pieces is like when someone listens to something for the first time, and then the second time, and then the third time, and then the fourth. So obviously there could be surprise factors the first time, but then with most listeners, the second time, those surprise factors are now gone.
Sure.
Right.
You can't rely on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not something I would think about too much, because you're only doing that for the first the first listen.
Mm-hmm.
It's only
right.
Some stuff like that's only good for the first listen, and I would say a goal of most composers is they want people to listen to their music more than once.
Sure.
So
Right.
it could be a surprise first time. Oh wow, what was that? I'd do that. I have an really old piece called No D, and it has I would call it a surprise ending. And every time we play it, people are like, whoa, how'd they do that? How did they end there? It's not a surprise at all. It's like totally obvious to the musicians,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't put a visual cue on it, and it's a little abstracted. So if you've never heard the piece before, you wouldn't know the piece well enough to know that, we could figure out, we know where we're going to end.
Sure.
So that's great for a live gig, but hopefully there was also enough in that piece that then people will say, oh, maybe I'll buy that CD, or maybe I'll listen to that again. And then they'll remember, oh yeah, remember that thing at the end. Still might be a little bit of a surprise where it ends, although they know it's going to end, they know it's going to have a quick ending.
Sure. So let's say you have a poem or a book or an image or an idea, and you say, all right, let's try to write a piece on this. Are you then thinking, let me try to pull the emotion from this, or what is the response that I have to this? How do you begin then turning that into a piece of music?
Right. So that would also be different for each piece and each poem. So, and that would also be something that I kind of gather together lists of processes. And so I would not repeat myself. I might repeat myself like 10 years later or 5 years later, but not tomorrow. And so that part of that would be about how to use, let's say a poem, how to use that poem. And so some poems you just want to set. It's a poem. You want to set that poem. One of the last poems I did, I think I just wanted to set it because I want everybody to hear this poem. I love this poem. And so it's just about, you get into trying to make sure that the emotion of the poem is there, and the lyrics, and you might use text painting and things like that. So that's definitely something I've done, and that I would do. On the other extreme, I have I did a piece with a poem. I mean, now this is a experimental poem. So the poem is it's a Japanese poem. It's a Japanese poet who all his poetry is just using the Japanese numbers 1 and 2. And it's amazing. It looks amazing. And when he recites it, it's like beautiful rhythms. So now there, I mean, there's not maybe a lot, you could say, like, not a lot of text painting possibilities or setting, the lyrics. So there I just was using the structure of the poem. So, I took his structure and used that to create, it gave me the whole piece. I had to find, basically I had to do some assigning of pitches, and as obviously assigning of instruments, but it gave me basically the piece is just there, already. I just had to like kind of pull it out. So that's like totally different use of poetry. So everything in between, but so sometimes using just the rhythms, sometimes trying to get pitches out of the poems, sometimes maybe just using the letters of the words of the poems, or the syllables. There's a lot of musicians that have done that type of thing, like using just the syllable. I forgot what you call that, but the syllable rhythm. The rhythms that you get, the number of rhythms and all that. I think I did a Shakespeare piece, and definitely came up with the phrasing from the actual sonnet.
Sure, but it sounds like you're changing your process for every piece.
Exactly.
That's kind of amazing.
Every piece has a different process. Yeah. So I keep really lists of like how to begin a piece, and so these are just fictitious pieces that haven't happened yet, but maybe someday might happen. So all the ways you can start a piece, all the things that you can use to start a piece, then those things that you start a piece with, all the ways to develop those things, different ways to use form, and so kind of doing all that pre-composition work helps. When you're in the moment, you're not so like, oh no, what do I do? You're like, oh, well, I've thought about this, I've done this. It gets a little harder the more you write, if you don't want to repeat yourself, because it's like, oh, that's a great idea. No, I did that. Oh, no, I did that. It takes a little longer to come up with the new thing. Whereas like when you're younger, it's like every time you write a piece, like, oh, I've never done this. After 10 or 15 years, that part gets a little bit harder.
Sure.
So yeah, creating these lists has helped to, kind of in moments when I'm not writing a piece, to think about it.
Yeah. So is it something like as you're listening to music, or as you're just you'll start to think about, oh, here's a possibility, and just conceptualize that. What is, here's a beginning to a piece that I could use. Here's a way I could develop it, whatever, and literally write it down and have it around.
Yeah. A lot. It doesn't. I would say most of the time it doesn't come from listening to music, but it has on occasion, and I would say it would come from like hearing something and thinking, oh, I could do that, but over here, like right now I'm listening to it here, So like the example I use with students, I think, is how many times have you heard an orchestral piece that starts out with 8 bars of drums? Let's say it's rare. Anyway,
Yeah, sure, right.
And now it's 8 bars of improv drums on drum set. Okay, now we're getting like even much rarer,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So that's like something in one area that's pretty common, go to a jam session, you'll hear drums play 8 bars out front sometime that night, probably. So but then you take that thing and you put it in another world, and it's totally, all of a sudden it's like, wow, that would sound really cool. And it could, it could lead to, oh, well, I'm actually going to have somebody improvise, but then that can lead to practical concerns like, is there a drum set player in the orchestra? Oh, there's not. Okay. All right. Well, or is there someone that can improvise? Oh, no, there's not. Okay. So then, it means like, okay, now I'm going to write a percussion intro that sounds like a live improvised drum set solo. So that sounds, that could be amazing.
Sure.
Right. But it's pretty normal in one place, and then another place it's like, whoa.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Interesting. And do you so what do you have as a routine? Do you wake up and every day you have a certain amount of time that you write, or how do you then go about creating new music just from the ideas?
I wish I could do that. I don't have, I've never really figured out the lifestyle choices to make that happen.
Sure.
What I just did when I was in New Mexico, but I haven't done that in a while, but there was about 10 years where I did this every year, where I would go to an artist retreat for about a month and just write, like not play drums or anything, just write. And there, of course, that's when I'm waking up in the morning and writing. And of course the rest of the year was not like that at all, because I'm playing and I'm teaching and traveling, and so that period would just feed the rest of the year. Like I would start things and finish them later, and gather together lots of things, that I didn't necessarily finish. Sometimes I actually would finish it, but I'm like, I don't know what this is or what it's for. And then, 6 months later, I'm like, hey, remember that thing? That could go with this thing that somebody just asked me to do that I don't have time to do right now. But hey, I already started it. So, that kind of thing. So that's still kind of where I am. But I would say the other thing is it's just, very, very intense periods of writing.
Okay. And so you set that aside for yourself. You say, this month, I'm going to prepare to do this, and then I'm going to dive in and get in the zone and get wild.
I wish it, it's not even that good. If I think about the last record, the song, Songs You Like a Lot, I was just, anytime I had a few minutes, I was thinking about it, right? For a long time. 6 months, let's say. And then, I remember talking to Alan Ferber, about a couple weeks, maybe it's I was going to Europe. We recorded it in Europe, and I went to Europe about 2 weeks ahead of time. And then I talked to Alan maybe 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time, and I was like, yeah, I'm doing this record. I haven't really started writing the music. I just started writing the music, And he was like, "Oh, that's so awesome." And I was like, "No, that's not awesome. This is not an awesome feeling. This is not a good feeling. It's not it's not a good feeling." But, on the plane, on the trains, it got really intense the week before I was teaching. So I'd be teaching let's say 9 to 4, and then just back to the hotel room, until 8 the next morning, and that,
Sure.
It's not my idea of fun, but
But you got it done. I mean,
I
it
did
seems to work.
Yeah,
But
well, I did. Yeah.
So the deadlines, I guess, are sort of your friend in that respect.
Deadlines are key. Deadlines are very important. Yeah. Without deadlines, I don't think I could get anything done.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That is an amazing tale because that music is elaborate. I mean, it's not something you just throw together. I mean, it's very dense. And I was listening to songs you like a lot, and I was like, this is an amazing record, and there's a lot of stuff on here. And then I discovered that there's 2 other albums of the same, not the same material, obviously, but like of a similar, let's say, conception. And were all 3 of those recorded at the same time?
Oh, no. This project started like 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay.
So songs I like a lot was, I'm going to say, 2000, I'm not sure, 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or something like that, around there.
Sure.
And there wasn't really like a plan, but then, it went pretty well. And so there was like, hey, maybe we should do another one, So then at some point I realized that it was, that I gravitated towards songs that I liked. Mm-hmm. And so then I was like, oh, well, for the next one, I did it with Kate McGarry and Theo Blackman. I was like, you should pick some songs. And then I've even talked to some people in the band, the Frankfurt Radio Big Band. Maybe you can think of any songs you might, want me to do. And so then that was the songs we like a lot. And then after I did that, what I realized, because, I didn't pick those songs, or at least some of them. And so I might not even have liked them, some of them.
Okay.
And so that was a kind of a really beautiful moment where I was like, oh, I don't have to like it to write a successful arrangement. So then I was like, oh, well, so for the next one, what we should do is we should just have other people just decide what songs to arrange. So we put something on Facebook like a long way ahead of time, and then some people wrote, like one person I think put 50 songs. Like some people put a lot of songs, some people put 1 or 2. And then we had like a vote, and there was about, I think we brought it down to 20. And then after 20, I still gave it to Theo and Kate because they have to sing it. So I was like, okay, so out of these 20, and some of them they were just like, no, definitely not. I'm like, all right, whatever. So then, yeah, it was really just down to time. I think I had it maybe, I forgot how many are on the record, but I think I had about maybe 10 or 11 or 12 that I was working on, and then just a few didn't make it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's how that evolved from songs that I figured I have to like this song to be able to arrange it and enjoy the arranging process and all that, to, by the end, songs, it didn't matter what I thought about them. I just, considered them material that in itself is not good or bad. It's just stuff. And so I would just try to find, where can I, I'm still obviously gravitating towards what can I find in this piece that I like.
Mm-hmm. Sure. What is it now? I guess if it's sort of a choice by committee, this may be there may be many facets to this. But as you go through these songs, what is it about a song, let's say a popular song in one of these veins, that you say this is going to work? This is something I can really work with.
Well, in this case, I didn't do that. I just here's the pieces, and then I just tried to do it, and then some of them I let's see. I'm trying to think of the pieces. I basically just try to put aside my personal feelings for the music and try to just, okay, what can I do with this material? So I'm looking at the melody, mostly the melody, mm-hmm. the melody and the words, because those I'm almost always going to use. Maybe, possibly not the words, but the melody is really what I'm, really definitely going to use. Mm-hmm. So then, I'm just trying to say, like, what is that? If you take away everything else, what is that? And then, almost like if you, like there's like those like animated cartoons where, like, let's say Bugs Bunny's there, and then they erase everybody around Bugs Bunny. Yeah. It's kind of like that. So you erase everything around the melody, and then you just have the melody. And then you can build now something totally new and different around it.
Sure.
In a way, it's like I'm rewriting the piece, like as if I was the writer of the piece and I didn't like it and I wanted to rewind. Okay, I don't like any of this. So let me just go back to the melody, and now let me do this again. And kind of treat it like that, which I think I could do better than, not better, I can do more. It's easier for me to do that because it's not my piece. So sure. I'm not attached to it at all. Mm-hmm. Like, if I think it's hard. It's pretty hard to do a lot of times with your own music because you become attached to certain parts. But, that's the good part about this. I'm not attached to it at all. So I can get rid of things and change things. And, in the end, I'm just trying to kind of bring out a different part of the piece, a different, way to look at or listen to the piece, so that if you like the piece, you might even be like, oh wow, I never thought it could sound like that. That makes me appreciate the piece even more. And now I can also go back and listen to the original, and then and then if you don't know the piece, it can be like, whoa, what was that? Oh, I got to check that out. That's pretty interesting. And then when you go to listen to the original, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what happened? How did that? I don't, how did that work? Yeah. So it could be, hopefully kind of brings together like the interesting relationships we have with those pieces.
Yeah. Now, as you're trying to reconstruct these pieces, are you thinking, let me try to make a statement about the original piece, or there's a mood that I want to create around this? Or is it just, here's the raw materials, here's the stuff that I have to work with as a sort of, as a, constructor of this world?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of times I'm thinking of what is the meaning of this piece, and then, but perhaps, so for instance, in the piece, in the Bee Gees piece, "How Deep Is Your Love?"
Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorite
when they sing, "How deep is your love?" Usually they go, "How deep is your love? Is your love how deep? How deep is your love?" is like almost like a, it's not a big line. And so I took that line and that made that my mantra for the piece. Is that's a serious question I'm asking you now. How deep is your love? No, how deep is your love? If you keep asking that question, it's like, geez. So that's kind of where I took that, is like, okay, what if that line, what if you really ask that in a real different way, and it really becomes very emotional. So it's the same material, I just kind of emphasized a different part and hopefully give it a very different emotional feeling. But I'm not changing, the melody or the words. I'm just kind of, putting it in a different room or different, environment.
Sure. Yeah. I think too of Knows Only God. You're in the beginning of the piece taking the lyrics and moving them all around in different ways and like creating these patterns with the lyrics. It certainly makes you think of it in almost a completely different way. And I found it fascinating listening to it, because I felt like I had the original song on in like one ear in my head, and then there's this other whole psychedelic thing happening almost. It was like a multi-layered experience. To have such familiar material to work with, really, as from the listening standpoint, is so interesting, because it's music that we're familiar with, and now all of a sudden we see it from such a different light.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that piece definitely is, on one end of the spectrum of what you would do with a piece, and probably the first time that I ever literally arranged words. Like it's not something I think I have one other attempt this Andrew Lloyd Webber piece, but I never really finished it. But that's maybe where that idea came from about like, what if you changed the order of the words? But basically it just came from God only knows to knows only God. I like just that like is a completely different phrase. And once I did that, then I was like, oh well, I could just change the order. I have a whole sheet, like at least one piece of paper of just taking the that one phrase of that piece and just changing the order. And I got so many different phrases that all kind of, most of them actually even make sense. It's not like gibberish. It kind of makes sense, but it's a totally different meaning. And so yeah, that was kind of the cool thing about that piece for me, is like I was arranging words, and that was the first thing that I did, and that was the in any kind of arranging or writing process, there's parts that are really fun and exciting. There's always painful and boring and terrifying parts too, but that was the really fun, exciting part, is like when I was just playing with the words.
It really speaks to your point about just, you create these different processes for yourself, and by nature the song's going to come out different than what the last piece that you did.
Hopefully, yeah. I do know that it's possible that like you're like, oh, I'm gonna start like way over here, I'm gonna do this totally different thing, and then you just go like, and then you like end up exactly where you always are. That is possible, but I'm aware of that, and I'm aware of like what I would if I go with the first thing that comes into my head, where that's gonna where I'm gonna end up. So I try to be sensitive to like, no, I'm like way over here. So I'm not going over there. I'm just gonna stay over here. And like, how do I stay over here? It does take discipline and concentration to kind of stay out of your comfort zone.
Sure. Were there any tunes that you did that you really hated to start with, and then you ended up either liking, or you were really happy with the way that the piece came out?
I think that's a no comment question. But, I mean, that is, I can answer it by saying that is the kind of the where I ended up in this project, is maybe with pieces that I didn't like, but of course the arrangement in the end, I want to. It's natural that I want to like the arrangement that I made of the piece.
Sure.
So yeah, there's definitely pieces in this trilogy that I don't like the originals, let's say. But the takeaway from the project is that doesn't really matter. I can still like create interesting arrangement that I like of a piece that maybe I don't like.
Sure. I feel like that must be somewhat freeing, in that if you can create an arrangement that you like out of a piece that you may not like, then you could do the same thing with your own pieces that you do like. I mean, to then take a piece of your own and try to, you no longer have any limitations or worries about, trying to create something from your own music.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, arranging and composing are kind of the same thing for me, but like I said before, it is a little easier to arrange other people's work, especially a piece that you don't know. Some of these pieces I didn't know, and let's say, and or maybe even some pieces that I didn't like, versus if you write a piece, it's pretty hard to not get attached to your own music. And then what makes it hard to work with is that attachment. So I mean, that's something that I work on a lot. I mean, I remember even on one of these residencies, I kind of wrote that like on the wall, like, don't get attached, because then you can't play with the material. And a lot of times like um, composition lessons are really bizarre, and so sometimes a student will come in with a piece that they've written, and they'll be like, "Yeah, can you help me with this piece? Like, it's not good." I'm like, "Sure, okay, so maybe what you can do is take the B section." No, not the B section. I like the B sections. I love that part. Okay, whatever. Well, then maybe you can take this other thing. No, that's my second favorite part. So we realize that although they don't like the piece and they know it doesn't work, they're attached to it, and therefore they cannot change it.
Mm.
So I'm very aware of that as a teacher and as a composer, that can be that can really make things hard. If your material is starting to solidify as you're writing it, then it's like clay in a way, and then it's like you can't play with it anymore.
Mm.
So I'm very aware of how things can solidify and how you can get attached. So repetition is one way. If you find something you like and you just play it over and over again, it starts getting like, oh well, that now that has to be in the piece, like just like that. I can't change it.
Mm.
So I try not to do that. And also labeling things. So if you come up with something and you just say, "Oh, there's the bass line," so right away, and okay, now it's just the bass line. It's could be good bass line, but it could have been an incredible melody, or an incredible chord progression, or incredible accompaniment, or something else. But now it's going to be a pretty good bass line.
Mm.
So just labeling things right away can also solidify the material. So I try to keep things open, try to keep them liquid when I'm working on them. This could maybe be this. This is maybe an intro, or maybe this, and like put a maybe, at least a maybe, in front of everything, and also to check it out, to say, okay, here's my melody, okay, but is my melody possibly a bass line? Is my melody possibly a chord progression? So at least check it out. And a lot of times you can find more than one use or role for material. So something can be a melody and it can be a chord progression. Maybe it can even be a bass line.
Sure.
Maybe it's your form, and maybe it's a counter line, and it could. So the whole idea of cellular composition is like you just have one thing, and you just take that one thing and you make that one thing into everything that you need for the piece.
Sure. So can you explain, just sort of elaborate on what you mean by cellular composition?
Well, okay, so let me just tell you it's important to say where this came from for me. So later on, of course, I found out that people like Schoenberg and classical composers and composers going way back to when people first started being like composers, started writing music based on, let's call it motivic development.
Mm-hmm.
But so for me, I went to the Banff Jazz Workshop when I was in college, and Muhal Richard Abrams was there.
Mm.
And he did this great lecture. He drew this dot on the board. And for a long time, it was extremely uncomfortable because he just asked people, "What is that?" And he went through, like, every person in the room had to answer what that was. So what he was getting to was that that could be anything. It could be a dot, it could be a circle, it could be a note head. It could be a bunch of different things. So in effect, it could be anything, and it could be the beginning of your piece, and that you could start a piece with anything. And as long as you have that one thing, once you have that one thing, then you can take that one thing and develop that one thing. So, take it like, I use like usually, I hope this won't fall down, but I usually use like, this is the one thing, then you do this to it, and you do this to it, and you take it apart. You do these different processes, which we have, names for, but the names aren't important. And through that, though, you create all this other material. You're finding out what that thing is, kind of like almost like experimenting on it and finding out what it is, which can help you kind of decide what you're going to do with it. But you're also getting all this new material, which is actually the same material, but just sounds different.
Okay.
And so if you build this body of material based on this one thing, a family of material, and it's then not so difficult to put that material together, because actually it's the same material. So it usually kind of goes together well.
Sure.
And then the idea, if you try this, in my case, I tried it. I really enjoyed the process, but then also I really enjoyed the sound of a organic, what I would call organic sounding piece. In that there could be lots of different things happening in the piece, but when the piece is over, there's also this feeling of a singular gesture. I took this and then blah, 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 all this stuff, and I put it right here, and here it is for you 10 minutes later. So I really love that, everything about that.
Sure.
So I wouldn't say I write in this cellular way 100% of the time. And because sometimes, obviously, like anyone else, I just sit down and a tune just pops out. Of course, when I'm lucky, that happens once in a while. But normally it doesn't happen. And I really enjoy this process. So, well, first I'll just say the other person who really talked about this was Bob Brookmeyer. A slightly different way. What he was doing when I met him was he was saying, like, okay, you just need like 4 pitches. If you just start with 4 pitches, and then from there you should be able to write a whole piece. So it was kind of like the same thing. He was really kind of saying almost the same thing, but his own way. But if you take that idea, you can also use that idea in arranging. So I'd say, a lot of times what I'm looking for when I'm dealing with a new piece, I'm looking for the cell. What is the heart? What is the heart of this piece? What am I going to use the most? And most of the time, because in this trilogy of projects, it was with vocalists. So the idea was that people would be able to hear the original. Sometimes maybe not, but at least most of the time they could hear the original.
Yeah.
And so therefore, immediately, pretty quickly, I was like, what are the things that they are going to need? Well, they don't really need the original beat. They don't really need the original key, the original chords. They need the melody. They need the melody and the words. So those kind of automatically became the cells of the piece. And a lot of the new material that I came up with came from the melody. From the processing and development of the melody into other things that are actually not different but sound different, but also work well with the original.
Sure. That approach also sounds like a way of avoiding, maybe under certain circumstances it wouldn't work if you've got the song and you've got the melody and you've got the lyrics and what have you, but like if you're writing a piece, you don't have that idea that you just came up with doesn't have to be the bass line, or it doesn't have to be the melody, or it doesn't have to be the harmony. Like the idea of taking those ideas and just playing with it and just creating a ton of material. I know that's another thing that Bob Brookmeyer would talk about, is just putting notes on a page and just creating music. But then if you're just thinking about the notes as themselves or the melodies as themselves, you don't then have to put it into a category as being this is the harmony and this is the bass line and this is the melody. But we're it's so easy, especially it's true of any style of music. You come from a world where you learn the tradition, or you learn just the, let's say, tendencies of the music or the tendencies of the people who write it. And then you say, okay, well, I'm going to write a rock song. So it's going to be verse, chorus, chorus, or whatever, bridge, something. And then you get lost in these ways of writing. And certainly in jazz world, we could write 100 million AA, BA, 32-bar forms. But it's a fascinating thing really to think about, all right, I'm not going to label this a bass line or a melody. I'm just going to use this material and see what happens to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It does seem like a really freeing approach to writing. And it seems to me to shed a lot of light on what you're doing or how these pieces come about.
Yeah, that's the key for me is to, to try to find a cell, develop it, and play with it as long as I can. That's also gets back to the deadline. You play with it as long as you possibly can until you have to make a decision. Or also, like in the playing aspect, a lot of times things come like, oh, I can already hear that would be good that way. I don't say like I'm definitely going to do that, but I make a note of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of letting it come together. This is something I think, you'll hear Maria Schneider talk about too, about not one reason why people don't use computers, is that so you don't have to think about a meter or a key or even a tempo or an instrument. Certain,
Mm-hmm.
When you put stuff in the computer, automatically you just have to make some choices that might not be good choices, but you have to make a choice,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, nice to keep things in this, what I call in the worksheet phase. So like I just have big pieces of paper and it's just a worksheet, it's a play sheet, playing with the material on paper and then, circling things and trying to be sensitive to if the piece is telling me what it wants to be.
Sure.
As opposed to me like imposing what I want the piece to be.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit esoteric, I think, but that's
I'm on board. Yeah, I got
that's
you.
how it feels anyway.
For sure. Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's go back in time a little bit. I want to get a little sense of your history in this. What brought you into music in the first place? And then did you start, I imagine you started playing drums first and then got into composition. What brought you into composition?
Okay. Well, my brother Pat is a great musician, also a drummer, composer. So he definitely 100% got me into this, and was my mentor, telling me what to do, who to study with, all that. So I was had to take piano lessons for a year, and then I guess if I stuck with that, I could start drum lessons. The other thing, though, that he told me was I had to be a composer. So it's part of the deal. So before I knew how to compose, I was already thinking about composing. Yeah. So that was that. I didn't really do any like actual really what I would call composing until maybe high school, when I again was still trying to do some composition. But yeah, and also the other thing that him and my first teacher, it was all about like you have to do everything. I played the circus, Oktoberfest, polkas, everything. Everything. Nothing. I would say no to nothing. So orchestral music, jazz, pop, everything. Xylophone, timpani, tambourine, drum set. You have to do everything, which in a way was good. I see people who were a lot better players than me because they just kind of did one thing. But I think that variety of experience was good to kind of figure out, okay, well, out of all these things, like, which of these do I really want to do? So at one point, it was obvious I wanted to do more drum set, more jazz type of stuff, even though I did study orchestral music. it became more apparent that, jazz was my love.
Sure. But all that other music you were playing, and even playing different instruments and what have you, had to have had a substantial impact on the way that you even viewed the drum set itself.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also my dad was an antique dealer, so one thing was that I had a collection of things and instruments. Yeah, all kinds of instruments, old instruments, and a bunch of them I used, but a bunch of them I didn't really, was like, I'm not sure how I could use this. Like, I could use this. I could use a cowbell, of course, once in a while, but like, I have now 6 cowbells. So what do I do with 6 cowbells? So a lot of that stuff didn't come together until I was like, maybe 28 or 29. I started doing these gigs in the East Village where all of a sudden I started putting things on the drum set. Mm-hmm. So more of like a prepared idea. And that's kind of where all that came together, where it's like all the little xylophones and all this little stuff that I had that I could use as a percussionist, Mm-hmm. I found a way to use them on the drum set, with the drum set. Mm. So that was kind of a bit of a breakthrough for drum set, anyway, for me.
Sure. What was the scene like around Binghamton when you were growing up? Did you end up coming into the city often to see music or hear music or whatever?
No. I mean, we're like 3.5 hours away, and like, we were getting the New York news, New York City news, very scary place, New York, murders every day. So, no, I wasn't. I personally wasn't really allowed to go to New York. I maybe was there maybe 3 or 4 times, in high school, mostly for Mets games, I think.
Sure.
And Broadway shows.
Uh-huh.
But we actually had a really good scene here. So there were people like my brother who had been here. Slam Stewart lived in my neighborhood.
Okay.
And through this guy named Al Hom, who taught at Binghamton University, he brought a lot of people to Binghamton. So like, I didn't go to New York, but I saw Elvin, I saw Jack DeJohnette, Mel Lewis, Brookmeier, James Blood Elmer, I saw Ahmad Jamal, Art Blakey, Betty Carter. I saw a lot of great stuff because it came through Binghamton.
Sure.
And then I grew up with Steve Davis, this great trombone player, mm-hmm. Dina DeRose, who at the time was a pianist, now is also a vocalist, great vocalist. Chris Jensen, tenor player. Tom Dempsey, guitar player. Tony Cadillac, who was a great trumpet player, who actually still plays in my band. Mm-hmm. So I went to high school with all those people.
Wow.
So it was just kind of a good time.
Sure.
to be here. So I had people. We had a steady jazz gig every Monday night. There was a jazz club in town, and we had a steady gig every Monday. That was big, huge to have a steady jazz gig when you're in high school.
Oh yeah.
With good players. So that's luck. That was just kind of luck.
Sure. There's no better way to learn it, especially at that age, than just to play. Have the opportunity to go out and play all the time.
Totally. Yeah, so when we were younger, we were jamming every weekend at each other's house, and then later on that became a steady gig every week. And learning new tunes and just playing, knowing that you had to play, every week.
Sure. So you graduated, went to Eastman.
Yep.
And then from Eastman you went to New York.
Well, I stayed for another year at Eastman, got a master's. Then I was just talking to a student about loans, and I had $10,000 of loans, which now doesn't seem like much, but at the time seemed like a lot.
Sure.
And my brother was involved in this too. He was doing a touring version of West Side Story at that time. And right before, like when I was still at school, a bunch of my buddies went. I think I got them a gig. And so then when I left school, I did that for a year in Europe, which was great because it was the first time I got to go to Europe, and we would often stay. We stayed in a lot of cities for like a month, in major cities. So that was great to see Europe, and also West Side Story is a really beautiful piece of music. So playing that was great, and it also paid off my loans. So that way I could make my way to New York. I went to Brazil after that for a little while, but then New York was the final destination.
Sure.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go there with tons of debt.
Right. That's wise. Yeah, that's a wise choice for sure.
Yeah.
How did you meet Bob Brookmeyer?
Well, I first met him in Binghamton when I was like 13. I mean, he didn't remember, but they were here. The band was here. I have some bootlegs of that band. It was a great band with like the sextet with Joe Lovano, Dick Oates, Jim McNeely. It was a great group. There's a great record called what's the name of that record? Glass. I always forget the name of that record. It's like really beautiful record. Sextet record. I think Tom Harrell's on the record. But anyway, I've met him. So at that time, then he came to Eastman when I was there. He didn't remember that either. But then at that time, I don't know if NEA study grants, I don't think they exist anymore. But at that time, you could get a little NEA study grant. So I applied for an NEA study grant to study with him. Around that time, he was starting a school. No, this is the first thing that happened. He was going to start a school in Holland. He was living in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
It was called the World School of Jazz. It was almost like a Banff type thing where they would have certain people for a few weeks, and then other people would come in. And it was just going to be this rotating faculty. The faculty looked amazing. So I did apply, and I was accepted. And then all the funding for the school just evaporated. And soon after that, he came back to the U.S. because he was living in Holland. And so then I applied for a study grant to study with him. And around that time, he said there was this band. He was kind of getting sick of playing with like old guys who wouldn't listen to him. Those are his words, not mine.
Sure.
So he had this possibility of starting this band through the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival in northern Germany, and he could kind of pick the band. It wasn't a professional really band at first. It was just like a workshop summer band basically. And so he asked me if I wanted to do that, and all the rest of the players were almost all Germans, and that became the New Art Orchestra.
Sure.
Very pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I don't know in the first year, I'm not sure, but pretty quickly it kind of, we would even we were officially the Schleswig-Holstein Jazz Orchestra, and then we would do that and rehearse and do a gig, and then when the festival was over, we would get on a bus and then just go somewhere else, and we were the New Art Orchestra, so it just happened, which was amazing.
Sure.
To play that music and to get to know Bob. So I had been I studied with him a little bit. I think I took 4 or 5 lessons, but that was a lot for me.
Sure.
And I think I learned just as much just from being in the band. He was so supportive, a real mentor. Really showed his love, and just he was so nice to me. So encouraging. Yeah.
That's amazing.
A lot.
I feel like it must have been, I mean, you must have been in the deep end there, but to be able to take the lessons with him and get a sense for his approach or some of his compositional techniques, and then be in the band and hear them night after night must have been, I mean, that's a kind of an education, it doesn't come along that often.
Yeah. I mean, but it's funny because, the teaching thing that was like a different phase in his life, and he was in a different phase musically. So especially at first, we weren't playing any new music. And so there was virtually no connection between the music you heard, Bob Brookmeyer's music, and then what he was talking about in lessons, which was like serial music.
Sure.
You know, but we did actually play. He has this piece called Serious Music. It's I think it's a piano concerto, incredible piece, and the Celebration Suite. So there were little. At first, he didn't even want to play his music that much. We played Jim McNeely's music, and maybe Bill Holman, and some of Brookmeier's music. He didn't even. But then, as the band became a band, he would find ways to write for the band. But even then, I would say, yeah, the I mean, it makes sense in a way. It's like he's not like teaching what he's writing at that moment because he doesn't really know. Maybe it's not codified enough to be able to teach it. So the things that he was teaching was kind of this whole kind of body of teaching philosophies and practices that I think he put together when he came back from California and he started teaching at the Bmi Workshop and different places like that. And that like he kind of started coming up with things that he could give students that would help them. And that's kind of what he taught. So it wasn't always, some of it wasn't like, it didn't seem to relate to what he was doing. There was a few things like his white note exercise.
Sure.
Which, I would say his white note exercise in the period that I came to play with him, that little exercise kind of almost became his, guiding force. He used that probably more than anything else because he was kind of not in the, he was kind of out of this, let's call it a serial chromatic phase. That was 10 years before that. So he was really like trying to revolutionize in formally. And so the music, when you first heard it, you'd be like, okay, it sounds like A minor. Like if you were listening to it in a certain way and you hadn't, drank the Kool-Aid on it yet, it would just be like, well, it's just some modal stuff, yeah, whatever. But when you really got into it and you saw what he was trying to do with the forms and all that, you realized that, where he was trying to, like he was picking like a certain place to kind of revolutionize.
Are there things that you think about now that were part of that philosophy or his approach, whether it be, I guess, composition or band leading, that still you think about today and it still is a deep part of the way that you operate?
Well, the cellular thing, like I was saying before, that's huge.
Sure.
This chorale exercise that he gave me when you were asking me, like when I wake up, what I would do if I do wake up in a place where I'm going to compose. The first thing I would do was this chorale exercise that he gave me, and I teach that to all my students, and so I find myself invoking the voice of Bob like so much that I might have forgotten what's me and what's Bob.
Sure, yeah.
I did in the last couple of months actually finally read Dave Ravello's book, and it was just like it was like an audio book. Like I was just hearing Bob's voice. It was just, oh yeah, I remember when Bob's yep there. Bob said that, and a lot of the stuff was very still right there in my it's really in there.
Sure.
So for sure when I know it's in there when I'm writing, but for sure when I'm teaching, I just I find myself talking like when I I teach a course at McGill, and the first class is my favorite piece, which is KP 94, and so I just have to play that piece first before we do anything else, just so like this is my favorite piece. And then later on we actually look at King Porter, and then we go back and we do kind of look at it again later in the course, because at first everyone's just like, yeah, that's a cool piece, but I don't know what that has to do with like what we're supposed to be doing. But
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's important to let everyone know. I would say he's still hasn't gotten the I don't know, the praise, the rewards. He didn't really get the rewards that he deserved when he was alive.
Sure.
But I mean, if you try to envision big band music today without Bob Brookmeyer, I can't do it.
Sure.
I don't know. I find it's very hard for me to think of anyone who's writing big band music who hasn't been immensely influenced by Bob Brookmeyer.
Sure, that's amazing, isn't it? I've had the opportunity to be in the Bmi Composers Workshop for the last 2 years, and that was sort of my reintroduction. I knew Brookmeyer's music well with his, the quintet with Clark Terry and a lot of his music, that kind of his playing as a trombone player, but incredible, yeah. And I've heard I'd heard his music quite a bit, but to go back and dive back into it, and then to the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who've been influenced by him, it's really amazing that the influence that he's had over so many people, and how it still sticks with everybody, and it reverberates through the whole community.
Totally. Yeah, when I first moved to New York, I was meeting like all these people that had taken the BMI thing with him, and it was intense. It was intense, the influence that he had, just from that one thing. But then if you go to Europe, he did the same thing in Cologne. He did the same thing in Copenhagen. So in Europe, there's also like, tons of musicians that were really influenced by his music, teaching, and I mean, I always still go back to the sound. Mm-hmm. His sound that he got is unbelievable. Mm. And it's like, wow, incredible.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this one. Now, you're no stranger to unique instrumentations, and you have the opportunity to use anything, any combination of instruments that you want, as did Brookmeier, and as do so many people who are writing in sort of the contemporary jazz world. But that foundation of the big band still persists. It's still like the palette. You switch out woodwind instruments, and you can add, I know Brookmeier would add synthesizer, and you can have vibraphone, you can switch things out, but it's still, this format still persists as sort of a primary medium. What is it about that instrumentation that makes it so malleable from, whether you're dealing with Basie, or whether you're dealing with Maria Schneider, or whether you're dealing with whatever's going on?
Well, I think it's because, I don't know when exactly, I think this happened maybe in the 70s, but when they started taking that format and making that ensemble the backbone of every jazz program, which jazz programs were being built around that time, starting in the 70s. So there's kind of two, well, that was the first one, and that's still the biggest one. There's another one that you might see more in like a kind of an NEC type thing, where it's more about maybe small groups, let's say. Mm-hmm. And now most schools do both.
Sure.
But once that happened, and weirdly enough, it happened at the time when there's actually no big band work for people. If they get out of school, they actually can't really be in a big band like they could, up until the 80s at some point. Mm-hmm. So then what you get this situation where you can go to any city in the world and find a big band. Mm. So it's just like that structure is there, As far as like all the rest of it, I try to let all the rest of it, go, the Sure. conventions of it. But I did kind of make a decision at some point, like, oh, okay, well, if I want anyone else to play my music, and if I want to play my music, because I can't bring my band around the world, so how do I do this? And well, if I just use kind of the same instrumentation as what most people have available, then that will make that possible. I'm very far away from being in love with the instrumentation of a big band, but that type of ensemble exists everywhere.
Interesting. Sure. So it's sort of in many ways a practical issue, but it gives you that foundation to work with.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like Brookmeier and many others, what I've tried to do is just kind of personalize it a little bit. So, in my own band, like my secret weapon would be Theo Bleckman, but I also use like mallet percussion. I use guitar. Woodwinds is something people can do or not do or whatever, But so at least kind of the sound of my band, I feel like is going to be slightly different than most other bands because of even just having just Theo and like mallets and no guitar, just in the like basic sound.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that helps me a lot. Having Theo around helps me a lot. It helps me remember that, this is not a big band.
Okay. Interesting. Because just
he can do anything.
Yeah, okay. And you will write him I don't know if exactly what the process is exactly, but he's very malleable in the sense that he can be an instrument, or he can be the lyrics, or he can be anything.
He can do
in that
anything.
Context.
He can do anything. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can play sounds, he can use electronics, he can play with the instruments, he can sing lyrics, any style. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
when did you start working with him? How long has he been in the group?
Oh, let's see, was he? I guess he wasn't in the group maybe in the very, very beginning, but pretty soon after that. Let's see. Whoops. Uh-oh. Hold on. All right. You still there?
Yep.
Okay. I got some sort of weird message on my phone. Okay. I'm not sure the year, but I was living in Brooklyn with Ben Monder for a short period of time, and Ben had a duo with Theo, and I had seen Theo play recently. Around that time I saw him play with Mark Dresser's group, and that was the first time I saw Theo, but also just the first time I saw like a male vocalist play, sing jazz, but also it wasn't jazz, and I just never heard anything like that. And they had a great duo. So I wrote them a piece called No Boat. That's like the title track of maybe their first record, but definitely one of the records. And then I invited Theo to do a free improv gig, and so that was the beginning. We did a lot of free improv gigs. He got me in Meredith Monk's group, which was a big deal, and I played in some of his groups. He played in my groups. Then I wrote a piece called A Blessing for Theo. Maybe that was the beginning. There you go. That's my grandfather. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Maybe that was the beginning. That piece might have been the beginning, the first piece that I wrote with the big band for him.
Sure. That's an amazing piece of music.
Thanks.
Let me ask you about the Claudia Quintet. What was the inspiration for that group? Did you know the musicians and you said these would be fun people to play with, or did you have the vision in your mind of accordion and vibraphone and clarinet, saxophone, or whatever?
Well, I was in New York and I was trying to find a group of my own. I wanted a group. I wanted to write for a group. And so, I was jamming with people and trying to see if this person might be into it, and this person, and so I was doing all that kind of thing. And then, I stumbled onto this gig through Ruben Radding to play with Ted Reichman in a trio in the East Village like a steady gig, and so that was great. That lasted like a year, and during that time I definitely met Drew, and during that time I met Matt Moran, actually on this Brookmeier gig in Schleswig-Holstein. He showed up. That's how I met Matt Moran. I also met my wife on the same day. So
wow.
That was a big deal.
That's really good.
Yeah. And so then Matt definitely told me about Chris Speed.
Mm-hmm.
And we had actually a couple other people before Chris Speed, a couple other people before Drew. But so it wasn't really the instruments. Although, when I played with Ted, and it was the first time I played with accordion, really, and also, it was accordion, but it wasn't really like accordion.
Sure.
It was great. I was just like, this is like a mini organ. You can do so many things with this. And then with Matt, it was like, well, I play vibes, but not like this guy. This was like unreal what he was doing on the instrument. It felt like he was reimagining the vibes. And also, it was the first time I actually played with a vibraphone player. So it was kind of like playing with another drummer. But playing with another drummer a lot of times is a drag because you have the same sound. And so it was like another drummer, but he has a totally different sound. So I really love that. And then, once I put the combination together, I was like, oh, this is cool because like the accordion and the vibes, as long as the tuning is cool, they kind of have a good connection. The accordion and the clarinet has a really nice connection because of the reed instrument,
Mm-hmm.
And then the clarinet, it was not luck, but, through working and looking and seeking and finding the right people who also happened to play these cool instruments that when you put them together, I had never heard before that combination.
Mm-hmm.
And so it worked, So it was a combination of the people and the instrument.
And over the course of the time you've been playing, obviously the sound and what you're writing has evolved in a certain way, but it seems, listening to that first album, like you kind of came out the chute with a concept in mind. Like it seems fully formed. I don't know if you think about it that way because you've been involved with it for so long, but were you thinking of a particular stylistic approach, or was it just let me write tunes that's going to work for this instrumentation?
Well, I think what helped was the gig that I did with Ted in that year. So what happened was we did that gig for almost a year, and that was like in the what was called like kind of the knitting factory scene. So I was playing with all these people who didn't go to music school, they didn't study jazz, they were totally into improvising, and totally into just playing like music that was not like about a style. And then when that ended, there was this little period when I was kind of right when I was really making the group, where that steady gig was still happening, but that group, Ruben Radding at that time had decided to leave town and quit bass, so he left, and so the group was over, and that's why I said, Ted, I still want to play with Ted, and so I formed the group kind of because that other group, died, and yes, there were some really interesting moments where I would play with Drew Gress in this little internet place in the East Village on Monday night, and then on the next Monday night, me and Drew would be subbing in the Village Vanguard band, and just kind of looking at each other like, this is weird, like, but the fact that we could do it, we could be in those very different worlds,
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the thing is, like, when I was growing up, like, playing drums in the Village Vanguard band, that was it. That was as high as I could see. That was it,
Sure.
Unfortunately, by the time I did it, then it wasn't it anymore. I was like, so the stuff that we were doing on the East Village, actually was me. That was where I was like, there I am.
Sure.
I found it. So I forgot what the question was, but what was the question?
How did you think about trying to form the style of the music?
Oh,
Was
yeah,
it
yeah.
something that you
So,
consciously approached, or was it?
right. So it became more about just, playing with people that don't think about that kind of
Sure.
thing. And
Okay.
even though Matt and Chris went to music school, they were like that. And so, yeah, it was really about creating music that's combining all these great things that you like, grooves and textures and composition and free playing, melody, melodies and just all that stuff, and kind of letting swing and jazz, like letting them like kind of go. They're in it, but they're just like a part of it,
Sure.
instead of being like it.
Yeah. So it was sort of an outlet, or let's say, the output from all of the various input that you had playing in all these different kinds of organizations, and without sort of, I don't know, without any kind of preconception as to what it was going to be. It's just, let's just freely try to incorporate all of this music.
Exactly.
And I like that idea a lot. I like the idea of not having, not putting limitations on yourself, or not putting barriers on what it is that you're doing, or trying to pigeonhole yourself into a style. It's so easy to fall into the trap of being like, let me do this thing because this is what I learned, or this is my history in the music, or this is what I'm trying to go for. And then, but all the people that we admire as musicians that we love were the people who came along and said, yeah, but I'm not going to do it that way, or I'm going to do my own thing. Like, there's no point. I don't think that Miles Davis was like, let me do this exactly the same way that it was done. That's the whole thing.
I mean, I think he thought about it. I mean, there's these quotes about him talking about how much he loved playing ballads at exactly the time when he was not playing like any ballads,
Right.
So, I mean, for him, it was a creative act to keep going and looking for this, what I would call the mysterious, what now I would call jazz, is this kind of the next thing that you can't codify yet and doesn't have a name. That's what some people call jazz, and that's why they do this stuff, is they're looking for that next thing.
Sure.
And so it goes back to what we were saying before, with the Claudia Quintet, I was able to create this music that was just mysterious, that I was just like, I don't know what this is, one of the first quotes from a reviewer was, "What the hell is this?" And he was, I think, not exactly like super excited about it. He was kind of like, really, seriously, what is this? Like, but for me, that was like, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Obviously, it's not a great business decision, because a lot of people do want to know what it is, and record stores are kind of not what they used to be. But in a certain period of time, it was like, where do we put this record? You gotta say, you gotta tell me, fine, you do all this stuff, but you gotta tell me, what is it? I need to know, like, because I have to put it in a place. So it's frustrating for some people,
Sure.
because they need to know, like, yeah, but tell me what it is, because I need to kind of organize it.
Right. Yeah.
In my mind or on my bookshelf or whatever. So I think that mysterious thing is what some people would call jazz, the seeking of the mysterious, and that's what connected me to jazz in the first place.
It seems to be what continues to drive you forward.
For sure. Totally.
Do you have any plans in the works? What's the next thing for you? Do you have some ideas floating around? Do you have a mission?
Oh, well, we got a new Claudia Quintet record. We remotely recorded it, and it's being mixed right now. And there's some poetry being put on it soon. And I'm writing a lot of. I'm writing right now. I'm writing some music for this school in Australia, Monash University. I'm writing a piece for 12 drum sets.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty cool, because what I realized really quickly is that we're not going to play, and I'm playing in it, I'm one of the 12, is that it's going to be like kind of the opposite of what drummers usually do, which drummers usually like play a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to be mostly about resting.
Mm.
And there's going to be a lot more rests in the piece than actual notes.
Mm.
So
it's got to be fascinating trying to come up with trying to think in those terms. Like, what am I going to do with all these drum sets?
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I've got a concept. I've got the concept, and it's coming together. And trying to use the remote recording situation to our advantage.
Sure.
So yeah.
How was it recording the Claudia Quintet remote?
It was okay, actually. I think because we've played so much together, that, yeah. I mean, the thing about the remote thing is, like, it's a bit of a drag for the first person. And then,
Sure.
like, if you're the last person, it's like, whoa, that's just kind of like playing with the band.
Sure, right.
You know? So, of course, the drums are usually first. But I didn't, yeah, it was, I think it was okay. I think, we've been together for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we could use that, So it's like, even if, like, okay, I can't really feel what this guy is doing, but I can imagine what he would be doing because he's done it. Like, we've played together so many times that you can kind of, or at least I'm going to do what I usually do here. And then, and if everyone does that, it will sound kind of almost the same.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're not hearing the same thing, we can kind of come at it with the same philosophy.
Sure. It's kind of amazing. I'm sure it's a huge advantage to have, everybody having played together for a long time and to have such a consistent group as well, like being able to play with the same people. It's interesting how everybody's had to adapt to the new technology in our current day and age. And
yes. I mean, I didn't even own any mics.
Oh, wow.
A year ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And
I was just thinking about the Zoom thing because, while I'm doing the Zoom thing, I'm like, man, by the time the pandemic's over, I'm going to be so good at Zoom. Like, I'm going to get my lighting together. Everything's, compared to how it was, a year ago. And
oh, sure.
It's much better.
Yeah. And we all had to just figure it out. I'm sure you teaching, you had to just figure it out on the fly.
Oh, yeah. No, I got pretty good at it. What was funny is, like, I feel like I got pretty good at it. Is all these things about Zoom are kind of bizarre, but then, you learn them. And then, I stopped teaching for a month or two, and I was in New Mexico, and I had to do this master class. And it was all the same kind of, I had the same, like, Zoom neurosis, and just like, oh my God, how do I do this? And, and I also had to do a thing for the ISJAC and the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a masterclass-ish type thing, talk with Theo and Kate, but it wasn't on Zoom. It was on this other platform, and a platform where you can't see the other people you're talking to. So that was really hard.
That's tough. Yeah.
So after doing that, I was like, I'm much rather Zoom, where you can at least see the people you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Let me ask you one more Claudia Quintet question. You've got an album called Royal Toast.
Yep.
And some of the tracks include Crane Merritt, Karamag, Armitage, Shanks.
Yeah, I'm
Zern.
writing that piece right now, yeah.
Oh, cool. Ideal Standard and American Standard.
Mm-hmm.
Where do those
You're
names
familiar
come
with
from?
those terms?
I thought maybe you could shed some light on there's a connection between the song titles.
I mean, it didn't start as a joke, for sure. It was that I was traveling a lot, and whenever I'd arrive in an airport, I would go to the bathroom, and often the names of those urinals were interesting.
Sure.
And so I started just collecting them. And then just over time, it just became like inspiration.
Sure.
The names.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's it. Yeah, they just became kind of interesting names that gave me a vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Crane Merritt totally gives me a vibe. Karamag vibe.
Sure.
So
And
it was
just
starting
that
point.
little bit gives you something to work with.
Yeah, exactly. It lets me know it's like I can do this over here. And that's not that. It's not that. It's not that. It's this.
That's amazing.
Kind of gave me a focus.
Sure.
It's funny too, ish, but it was more it wasn't supposed to be like most of the stuff. Doesn't start out as trying to be funny. It's just that as soon as I start telling it to people, they start laughing, and I realize, oh, I guess that's funny.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating point. Actually, I'm glad I asked. I didn't, but it's an interesting point. And did you then write the tunes based on the sort of the spark of inspiration from the names, or was it then you had? Yeah, interesting. So many people have such a different approach. It's sort of a small point, and maybe it's meaningless to some people, but just the way you title instrumental music, or the way that, the relationship of the title to the way that the audience perceives it, or the way that you feel as a composer, or where the title even falls. Do you just write a tune and it's called Sunset on Monday or something? Just come up with something, or is there some underlying point, to what it is?
I mean, for me, it's really important, and it's also really important to tell the audience, to like give them some sort of insight into this piece. Because I've been on many gigs with other people where they just say the name of the piece, and then we play the piece, and I'm like, yeah, but what is that? That didn't tell the audience, like, what does that mean? Can you give them like a little more info, or, just kind of help them out a little bit.
Sure.
And so I think that does help sometimes, and even sometimes, with music like that's strange, like Claudia Quintet, if there's a little bit of humor, that's actually good, because then they realize, oh, these guys are like human, they're like normal, it's not, the music's a little weird, but they're just regular people,
No
it
doubt.
can kind of help, people bring their their defenses down a little bit, and say, okay, they're normal guys. Yeah.
Great.
Well, I think that brings us full circle back to the inspiration, the beginning of many of these pieces. Well, thanks, John. I really appreciate your insight, man. It's been great.
I'm sorry. I'm supposed to ask you if you like cold pizza.
Wait, say that again. I lost you a little bit from the lag.
I'm supposed to ask you if you like cold pizza.
Is that who came up? Was it David Schumacher planting that in your mind?
It's just, it popped into my head. Just a question.
Come on, man. That's so funny. That's been following me for so many years, man. This is pretty hilarious. I do, but not so much anymore, because I live in New York, so you can get it hot, and it's delicious right off the thing.
Okay. But you got to tell me now. You have to tell me the story.
Well, we had a band in high school that we called Cold Pizza. Some friends of mine. That's how, I studied with David Schumacher back in the day, and he was a total inspiration, and he got me into a lot of music that, still, is still a big part of me. But the way that I learned how to play was really putting together a rock band in high school, or whatever it was. It was like whatever we wanted to do. It was kind of improvisational and whatever. But we would put on shows. We would rent out a school, like an old schoolhouse in the town, and there was nothing happening around West Newbury, Massachusetts. So we'd put on these shows and put on these concerts, and it was like these kind of wild theatrical things. And I was learning, like, this is how to play in keys, and this is how these instruments work. I started playing slide trumpet and all kinds of weird stuff like that. But the funniest thing is that, it was like a high school band, and I would play for the last 10 years. I'll show up in a club in, like, New Haven or in wherever, Rochester or something, and somebody will yell out from the audience, "Cold pizza." And I don't know if it's like somebody from my hometown, or sometimes I don't even see who they are. I'm like, what? Wait, where did that come from? It's kind of funny. But it was honestly, it's kind of funny, but it was a formative thing, man. It makes me think of like, the Knitting Factory approach of just being like, all right, let's just come up with something and just try it out and see what happens, Yeah. There's a lot of value in just doing everything and trying to learn it.
Yeah, sure. And I think most of the development comes through collaboration and bands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that's hard to do a lot of the time in jazz world. So often it's like, all right, we're going to call this guy for this and this person for this and her for this or whatever. But the idea being like, oh, we're going to keep a band together for a decade or whatever, or for a long time, and really learn each other's playing. That's such a rare treat. And it
Yeah.
seems so common in rock and funk and whatever world, and yet in jazz world, for some reason, I mean, there's a reason that the Coltrane Quintet sounded like that, or that the Miles Quintet sounded like that, or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And it is really hard to keep a band together, but I do recommend it highly to try to, get together with some people and try to hold on to that, because, the music can kind of go in places that you couldn't imagine.
Sure. Great. Well, thanks a lot, John. I appreciate it,
All
man.
right.
I appreciate your the insight.
My pleasure.
All right, gang. Well, thanks for joining us for another thought-provoking episode of Jazztopia. Huge thanks to John Hollenbeck for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about his creative process. That was amazing. Listen, cut the music. All right, I got to give a little shout-out to saxophonist and composer David Schumacher. Also, our high school combo director really had a big influence on a lot of us, many of us here in New York these days. First time I heard John Hollenbeck was actually in the Schumacher Sanford Sound Assembly. They have a record called Edge of the Mind that is really great. Hollenbeck plays drums on that record. I got to see him when I was in high school, and then later on. That was hilarious. It's hilarious, David. Good one, man. Giving him the cold pizza thing. It's hilarious anytime my high school rock funk band is brought back into existence somehow, especially by John Hollenbeck. All right, so that's kind of hilarious. All right, bring the music back in. All right, gang. Well, thanks again for checking it out. If you like the show and you want to keep up with what we're doing, you can follow us on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Jazztopia podcast. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Music and Apple Podcasts. We now have a YouTube channel, so check out the YouTube channel. We got all the videos up there going up. You'll be able to catch this on YouTube, and it is a great hang. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, be sure to leave us a positive review on your favorite streaming platform of choice. Subscribe, tell your friends, the whole shebang. All right, tune in next week. We've got Jennifer Wharton, and we'll be talking about her band Bonegasm and their new album, Not a Novelty. It's going to be a lot of fun, so be sure to tune in next Wednesday at wherever you get your podcasts. All right, thanks a lot, gang. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. See ya.